Europeans are funny because they always claim that, oh, they want higher purchasing power and yet they want more government. Like, you can have it both ways. If you want higher purchasing power, you have to reduce government. If you want more social program, then do not complain that your purchasing power is low. This is economics.
Yeah.
Someone who doesn't understand economics will think that you can have it both ways.
There's no free lunches.
Exactly. But people don't understand that. They think that taking money from someone else to give it to them will make them richer. It's the same with the redistribution of wealth. They think that when you throw money at them, when you redistribute things equally, everything is better, everyone is better off. But that's not true. It doesn't work that way.
I think that the basic point from which they start to reason for redistribution of wealth is that wealth is a given thing. It's a zero-sum game. That's exactly the opposite of how it is. If that was the case, we would still be living in a cave. I've got the honor of being accompanied today by Germinal G.Van to discuss the moral case for capitalism. So, Germinal, why would you say that capitalism is something good or desirable?
You're asking me if capitalism is something good or desirable.
Yeah, and why is it?
Why?
If it is.
Well, first, is it good or desirable? Yes. Why? Because it's the system that allow anyone to escape poverty. It gives a chance to anyone to raise out of poverty, because before capitalism we have feudalism, and in feudalism there was a strong inequality of wealth, and if you were born in the wrong social class, you're done.
Yeah, so it has been empirically shown that capitalism gives way to a betterment for the social ladder. You are more able to climb up or down or just move. There's more mobility inside of a society whenever the society is more free.
Yes.
Than when it is more intervened by the government.
Yes. In a capitalist society, there is more economic mobility. That's for sure.
Okay. And it's not just that there's more mobility. A random dictator could just point out to someone and say, now you're going to be rich, and now point to another person, now you're going to be poor, and that would be mobility. It's not just that there's mobility, there's also a huge creation of prosperity, isn't there?
Yes, because it's because capitalism gives the opportunity to anyone to be on the market. Capitalism is about just having an idea and monetizing your idea. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have like several YouTube channels, and each of your YouTube channels has more than 1,000 subscribers and more than 4,000 watch public hours. You get paid. People like your content, you get paid, and you make money. I know there is a young British guy. He has like 9 YouTube channels, and he never showed his face in any of his YouTube channels. And he makes like $100,000 a month. Yeah.
It certainly requires the skills.
That's all it takes. It's a skill and how to monetize your skill. The problem is that people are passionate about things that don't make money. And when you do something that can make you money, you're set. Let's say, for instance, that you're passionate about dogs. You love dogs. I don't know if you actually do, but let's assume that you do.
Okay.
If you do love dogs and you want to find a way to monetize that, all you have to do is to adopt many dogs, and you start a business of dog training. That's it.
So as long as you've got something that drives you,
yeah,
and
exactly,
you're willing to do it.
Yeah, as long as you find something that drives you, and you find how to monetize it. That's where people struggle. How to monetize something. And today it's very easy to monetize your passion. You can create courses.
It's never been easier than now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, like, you can, as I said, like, one of the best ways to monetize your passion is YouTube. If let's say you're passionate about cooking, you start a cooking channel. The only thing you have to invest in is like the cameras and the lights, to film yourself, like basically to work on the quality of the video, and that's it. And on top of that, it's cooking. So no one, like, you have more people coming. It's not like polarizing like politics. You won't have like nasty comments on your YouTube channel, It's pleasant.
What alternatives do you think there are to capitalism? Are there any alternatives? Or is it just, will the markets ultimately impose themselves? Because if they are, there's actually no alternative to capitalism.
I don't think there is an alternative to capitalism. People try to create alternatives to capitalism. And the well-known alternative was socialism. It was tried and it failed. It will be tried again and it will fail again. And the reason why it will fail again and it will always fail is because socialism is against human nature. Human beings are selfish by nature. If you want to see the true selfishness of human beings, look at how people in the same family, from the same dad, same mom, they have the same bloodline, and they fight over inheritance. Rich dad, he gives money to them, and then they like killing each other for the money. That's self-interest. It's selfishness. And that's how us human beings we are. And socialism tried to eradicate that. You cannot eradicate that. You cannot eradicate selfishness. It's part of who we are.
Selfishness, in a sense, doesn't exist as long as the genes intervene. The genes you have, or the ones I have, want to reproduce, or the genes that any living species have, really. And so in order to maximize the reproduction, they want to have descendants. And those descendants need ancestors to reproduce. And those ancestors, to maximize their offspring, they might treat the people from their family or from their collective good. And it might seem that they are altruists, but what is really acting is the selfish gene saying, treat the people around you right, so you maximize the odds of me spreading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. I think that selfishness, the pursuit of the well-being of oneself, is intrinsic to human nature.
Absolutely.
Why would you say the government is such a bad capital allocator, or is it?
Yeah, government is a bad capital allocator because whenever we say something belongs to the government, when we say it's government owned, in fact, it means it is owned by the people, by the public. The government in itself does not have property. So when government owns things, it allocates capital in an inefficient way because the capital is not owned by the government. So there is a lack of responsibility. And that's the difference between private property and public property. When you own something privately, you have the responsibility to make sure that what you own works. If it doesn't, there's no profit. But when the government owns something, there's no responsibility. If it doesn't work, people will say, it's not my fault. Then who is responsible? But when you own, let me give you an example. Let's say you own a store, like a grocery store. I come to your store, I look at the stacks and everything. The price are not well labeled to the right good. The floor is wet, so I slip, I fall. I can sue you. It's your store. It is owned by you, Alex. But if the store was owned by you and all your friends and your neighborhood, I come in the store and the same thing happens. If I decide to sue the store, who is going to be responsible?
There must be a hierarchy saying who's responsible.
Yeah. But the thing is that people would be like, well, I'm not responsible. It's not me. It's not me. It's not me. That's what they're going to say. And that's why when people do not bear the responsibility of owning things, they don't see the point of managing that thing efficiently because it doesn't belong to them. But when it belongs to them, they take great care of it. Milton Friedman always said, no one will spend your money better than the way you spend your own money. It's a fact. If you give me your money, I will not spend the way you spend your money. So,
yeah, we could argue that there's some biases in human nature that leads to a non-capacity or a suboptimal capacity to save in the long term, because your well-being in the long term is not as tangible as your well-being in the short term. So humans are incentivized to not saving. So maybe coercion in this case from the government saying you should save, and I'm going to take like 20% of the money you earn each month, and I will make it that to be invested in the S&P 500. I'm open to being convinced that that's a correct option, but in general, people are the best managers of their money. You're absolutely right. Those cases in which humans are not adapted to our current environment, I support evolution, and I think there's a mismatch between how we've been evolved to what we've been evolved and what our current environment is. And so the difference between these two things, the environment that we should be living in according to our genes and the environment we're living in right now, leads to inefficiencies. And one of them is our incapacity to plan in the long term. We obviously can, and now we're rationally talking, but when the actual day comes of paying 20% of your income for a long-term objective of not being poor when you're 80, you're not as incentivized of doing it. So in general, you're absolutely right. And until the government gets down into 2% or 5% of the GDP, whatever you say is absolutely right. I'm not. What do you think? What do you think of anarchism? Do you think anarchism is viable?
No, it's utopian. It's human beings, like they always want to have a utopian thinking. Oh, we're anarchy, we're free, and no, it's nonsense. No, we need government. Let me ask you this. If a plane flies over your roof, like let's say 20 kilometers up over your roof, is it violating your property?
I don't think so.
Well, how do you know?
Because my property is lent by the government. Ultimately, the owner of my property is the government.
Why is the government the owner of your property?
Let's say I don't want to pay taxes of trash collection. The government will increase the amount I have to pay and will penalize me. Let's say it's $100 a month, and if I don't pay it, they will say, okay, you're not paying, let's make it $150 next month. So you are now required to pay $250 instead of $200. It tends to increase proportionally. Mm-hmm. It's exponential. Mm-hmm. So it comes a moment in which if you don't care at all about the current judicial system created by the government will come by force and will expropriate the property out of you. So you cannot just say, this is my property and I can do with it whatever I want. There are certain things that the government tells you to do and that you should rule your property by its rules. So if the government is telling you how you have to rule over your property, you are not really the owner of your property. And the government, if I act as I want, will come eventually with violence and will expropriate from me my property. Will say, this thing, we had noted here this was from Alex, it's not from Alex anymore, and we are going to use the precise exact same thing that we were using to protect your property against you, and you will stop having property. Why? Because I'm saying that you have to pay some taxes, you haven't paid them, and because you haven't paid them, this thing that you had, it's not anymore from you. So I don't think that things ultimately are from me, but from the government. And taking that into account, if the government is the one who establishes what is from whom and by what conditions, and the government says that I'm not the owner of my parcel 20 kilometers up, that's not mine. And so, because the government says that, and that he's more capable of physically enforcing his rules than I am, I will accept the rules. I'm not saying that I don't accept it morally. I'm just accept it physically, because I don't have another option. So, no, it's not violating my property when a plane flies 20 kilometers up.
Okay, I actually like your reasoning. Your reasoning makes sense. I understand the logic. I have a shorter answer than what you gave. What you gave is valid, as a matter of fact. I totally understand because, yes, like, if you don't pay the property tax, yes, you'll get in trouble. But this is for another conversation, because there are ways to not pay tax that are legal. You just need to understand the tax loopholes. That's what rich people do. But this is for another conversation. But to come back to the anarchist point, the reason why I asked this is because we need an arbiter to define the rules. And that's what John Locke talked about in Second Treatise of Government. He explained that in the state of nature, people already have property, but we need a regulator to establish the rules so that we're all protected by the same rules within our property. That's why government is important. Government is here to protect life, liberty, and property. In America, we love to say the pursuit of happiness, but the true pursuit of happiness is the pursuit of property. If you don't have property, you're not free. That's the bottom line. It's the motto of American culture, is to own property, is to have assets. It's very important, because if you don't own assets, you're done. There's no way. That's why everyone in this country wants to have a home, It's a little different in Europe. In Europe, you guys don't have that mindset. But we need rules in the society. And human beings, no matter how civilized they are, they tend to abridge the rules. And I think if we have anarchies, I assume when you ask me about anarchy, you refer to anarcho-capitalism.
Yeah.
If you have a society that is strictly governed by individuals and markets, it will still create a new state. It will create a corporate state. Why? Because number one, human beings are prone to hierarchy. So a new hierarchy will form. People will never be equal. Because anarchy suggests that we're all free. We're all free equally. But people will never be equal. So those who have the means of production, those who are rich, will create a corporate society. A society governed by corporations, where profit will only be the driven factor for everything. In life, profit cannot be the single thing for everything.
Economic profit.
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah. It cannot be the single factor for everything you do. There are moral values, there's culture, there's the social aspect of life. And in anarcho-capitalism, because everything is based on markets and profit, people welfare will not be valued. And it will be corporations that will govern everything. It's not realistic.
So in the alignment of interest, that I think that capitalism is ultimately the most capable system of doing it, some kind of government intervention, some kind of coercion, of violence, of non-validated or non-valid morally, or how would you call it? I would say that some kind of coercion is needed in order to align interest in the best possible way.
Yeah, it's a necessary evil. If I am breaking into your house, how are you going to protect yourself if you don't have a gun or anything?
I could have an insurance against being robbed. So whenever I detected someone is coming, I will call the private police, and so they will be paid by my insurance company to do the intervention.
But what about the people who can't have the insurance that you have? You at least agree with me that in a society, not everyone can afford everything at the same time.
You are right.
So for those who cannot, so how are they going to do it? If the police is completely private?
And they will simply not do it.
And how do you know they will simply not do it? You're not in their mind.
Oh, no. I'm saying if they cannot pay for it, they wouldn't just pay for it. So they would be so robbers would be much more incentivized to rob that house that doesn't have a way of defending itself.
Yeah, exactly. But when the house cannot defend itself, that's why we need police. And the police is provided by government. When you call 911, there is immediately something sent to you. And then you can take it to court, and the court will adjudicate the dispute that happened, where you were the victim of it. So I think government has a role to play. It has a role to play in as we said, the elemental functions of government. We need the police to impose law and order in the streets. We need a military to protect us against foreign invasion. We need the judiciary system to adjudicate disputes. These are the elemental roles of government. And to me, it's very realistic. I don't see the Rothbardian thought of everything would be taken off by the market. It's nonsense. He never tried. He never tested. Like, how does he know? He just relies on people. Oh, yeah. And so, yeah, it's true, incentive matter. But you don't know how people react. In every society, there's always some maniacs around who don't care about your incentives. They will always break the law. They will always break rules.
Yeah, you're right. And so if that's the case, between common resources, it happens one thing that in economic terms is called the tragedy of the commons. There's many places in the economy in which the market is the most efficient way of handling the resources. For example, if you've got a company owned by different people through shares, those people are more incentivized to make it work the best possible way. But if no one is the direct responsible for what's going on, they will be like, I'm just going to go for whatever gives me the short-term benefit, because that's the only thing I care about, because I'm not going to be here in the long term. And so whenever that happens, I'm already getting the short-term benefit. The long-term costs are huge. The equivalent in a personal life would be to spend all your money with lavish stuff, trying to signal that you have money, and then you've spent it all. But during a super short period, you were appearing to be a super prosperous or super wealthy person. But that's in expense of the long-term thinking. So that short-term and long-term alienation comes only by skin in the game, through the people owning their own costs and benefits. What do you think on this? Do you think the tragedy of the commons is inherent to the government, or do you think there are other tragedy of the commons in the market that cannot be dealt by the market, as in, for example, free riders not paying for a private army?
Oh, that's a quite complicated question. Can you reformulate your question again?
Okay, so in the same way that the market is good in avoiding the tragedy of commons when things are managed collectively and no one is the direct responsible for things, neither for the good part or the bad part. So everyone will be incentivized to take the good part and no one will take care of the bad part. So the system will break out. It will not work in the long term. So that's the tragedy of the commons that's well managed by the market. But there's also another tragedy of the commons that the market is not able to manage. For example, when everything is voluntary and you can pay something or not, you can choose if you pay for the private army. Let's say, in a hypothetical terms, there's a private army and you can pay for it or not. If you don't pay for it and I live near you and I'm already paying for it, the fact that your house is near to mine and you're not paying for it is not going to make someone else want to invade you. They are going to have to pass through my house in order to invade you. So you're not as incentivized to pay the army as I am. Or maybe I'm equally as incentivized to pay in for the army as you are. But because you are more intelligent or you were a faster thinker in that moment, you were like, oh, I might as well not pay it, and I will not assume a personal cost, because the fact that I'm not paying it, a super small parcel in the middle of a city that's not protected by an army, is not going to make anyone want to invade that better than if it was protected by that private army, you know?
So what you're talking about is more like externalities.
Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
It's like the Pigovian externality, because in the Pigovian theory of externalities, he says that the mere fact that externalities exist, we therefore need government intervention, whether it's for the good or the bad. He's saying if you do something bad, you should have a tax, a social cost tax. And if you're doing something good, the government should reward you by subsidies.
Like having kids. They are expensive.
Yeah, or like education, something that brings a positive impact to society should be subsidized, and something that brings a negative impact to society should be taxed.
Yeah.
So now your question to me is, which one is better?
Oh, no. In a way that there's some tragedy of the commons that the government inherently leads to, and that the market is the solution to that, there's other tragedy of the commons that the market produces. So there's a need for a coexistence of both systems in order to make the economy go in the best possible way.
Yeah, so and that's what personally I've always support the private public approach, because it's realistic. I approach politics and economic in a very realistic way. Philosophically, I am more of a classical liberal than a libertarian per se. I'm not really a libertarian. I am a classical liberal. I believe in economic freedom. I believe in civil liberties and political freedom. And I believe in the rule of law. The rule of law, law and order, these are classical liberal principles. I'm not like really a libertarian where we say, oh, the government should not even do anything at all. I don't think it's realistic. We need government to some extent, whether we like it or not. Like if, for instance, you drive and there is no traffic lights, you're going to create accidents. If the traffic light is red and you say, no, I'm still going to go because it infringes upon my rights, what do you think is going to happen?
A collision.
Exactly. So the point is to say that a private-public approach is important. Why is it important? Because the public part should be to fund things, right? Is to fund things like, think of a charter school. A charter school is a school that is publicly funded and privately managed. And that's the best way. When things are privately managed, but the collective is paying for it, it makes more sense.
Not in all the cases, but in education, it seems to me that it's a proper way, because you, as a parent, are assuming all the cost of bringing this person that's going to add a lot of value to society in the long term.
Yes.
But you are assuming all the cost. So the society that's going to get a huge benefit in the long term should also be paying for the investment that the parents are doing in order to incentivize them to have the kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you. There's many things that if they are financed by the government and managed privately, the efficiency increases and leads to better outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not just efficient, it is realistic. Because the truth of the matter is we live in mixed economies. Wherever you go on earth, government is here. Government is involved. You have to work with government. You have no choice. Now the question is how to minimize the work of the government. What you don't want is the government to manage.
Do you know the decrease in utility of the marginal unit?
What?
In the same way that the first glass of water gives you a lot of pleasure, the second one might give you less of utility.
Yeah.
So I think that the same thing applies to government. When there's a huge government taking care of the 100% of the GDP, like in the USSR, the efficiency of the economy or the prosperity, the output of the economy is super small. But whenever you increase the share of the market to 2%, the increase in prosperity increases a lot.
Yeah.
Then it's not proportional to how big the market is in comparison to the GDP that the output increases. When the government is taking care of 98%, that 2% doesn't have an infrastructure to interact in a proper way. They are super dependent of the network of government companies. So if you increase the share of the market 2% more, let's say to 4%, the increase in prosperity will not double. It will less than double, but in the long term, when you get to 10% of the government and 90% of the market, the prosperity will be huge. So I don't know exactly how the graphic would be drawn into a table, but I think that when there's super small market, the efficiency of that small market is not able to do almost anything. But whenever the market has enough space to work, like for example in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, they are a relatively small share of the economy, but they are able to move freely. And so they have a huge output. But in Spain, where I live, the government is responsible for a lesser of a share of the economy, more or less like 35% of the GDP. But the regulations are huge. They are horrible. They manage the other 60% of the economy. So that other 60% of the economy that's held by private companies and private people is not left to work freely. So where I'm going is that whenever you get to the other extreme, to the reduction in the intervention of the government, the output of the satisfaction or the utility of the economy, however you want to call it, decreases again. It increases at first super slow. It tends to increase exponentially, and then once it's up, like in let's say 3-5% of the GDP managed by the government, it starts going down because that economy is not. I think this is just my intuition, and from what I've read, the output would start decreasing again if the economy, the share of the economy managed by the government, decreases farther than 3%.
Okay, well, you got into something very technical here. What I know is that an economy needs the market and the government to work together. In my opinion, the best approach would be to minimize the government management of economic and social affairs. Because when the government manages resources, it does not allocate them efficiently compared to the market. That's why market economies are more prosperous than central planning or societies that have more government than societies don't. When you look at France, for example, French people and Europeans in general love their social welfare. You guys really do. And yet, you guys are the same complaining about your purchasing power. I don't know if you watch the French elections right now, but the presidential campaign is going on. And the main theme of the French presidential election is buying power.
Yeah, populism.
The purchasing power. Oh, how do we increase our purchasing power? Well, first and foremost, you cannot increase your purchasing power when you have a lot of government involved. Because here's the thing. When you get hired by someone, right, your boss gives you a salary. You say, okay, we look at your resume, we look at your skill set, you're worth to us $2,000 a month. This is your gross income. But now, when you receive your paycheck, the paycheck you receive is not your gross income, it's your net income, right? There's a discrepancy between your gross income and your net income. In the middle, what has happened?
The government.
The more social programs you want, the more government will create, the more taxes they'll take from you. So your net income will be low. So you can complain that, oh, how do we increase the net income? If you want to increase your net income, reduce government.
But that's an intangible objective. They only see that if I take money from you and I use it in my affairs, I will have a higher purchasing power because you are paying partially for my things.
But it doesn't work that way. That's the thing.
It works in the short term.
It's the short term. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It will work for 6, 12 months, and then what? It's going to decrease. Because if you want to have a higher purchasing power, you have to reduce government expenses. The less government taxes you, the more you have in your net income. But if you want government to create this, to create that, to do this, to do that, government say no problem. I mean, more money for us. More tax revenues. But again, where government is going to get that money to create those programs? It's going to take it from you. Because government in itself doesn't have money. It doesn't have property. Everything government does takes from you.
Exactly. And so if the government is just the manager of the property from other people and coercively taking that property, I think there's a huge propensity to create populism. I will promise, let's say, whatever collective you want. I will promise this collective, I will take care of them by giving them handouts. I will give them quotas. I will whatever. I will help them via taxing other people or taxing everyone and then giving them whatever amount of money I've gathered. And that leads to populism because everyone would become a prostitute if they could prostitute someone else's asses, you know?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So with other people's money, it's super easy to say, I'm the best person in the world. I'm going to spend in you because I love you. Oh no, You don't love me. It's just that you are spending someone else's money in me, and in the process you are getting a huge. You shouldn't be rich. You should just be a normal manager of the economy. You work for the public. Mm-hmm. Do you know the teachers are called magister? Is a technical word, and the people who work in the government are ministers. Mm-hmm. That's means
you're serving the public.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The less relevant.
No, we have the same like in African countries. Yeah, a minister. Yeah, is someone who serves the public, and yet those guys are treated like royalty. I know.
The one who should be treated by royalty is not the minister, but the magister, the one who teaches, the one who is directly with the population adding value. This I got this from Nassim Taleb.
Yeah, no, I love Taleb. He's a great author. No, definitely, and I agree with him because it's, but it should be like this. But unfortunately, it's the way around. Yeah. And the reason why is because politics has become a platform to build wealth, but the wealth being built is what we call rent seeking.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's basically you're creating wealth for yourself without creating wealth for society as a whole.
Check what I have right here. This is my Kindle. I've been reading your book lately, and I think that if I can more or less make a summary of it, it would be that Black Americans during the 20th century got something really bad. They thought that the path to prosperity was through government handouts, and it's not. It's precisely the opposite way. Mm. It's precisely through the liberalization of the economy, the seeking of prosperity through markets that would lead to prosperity, as you have made historically. Yeah,
that's basically the central theme or idea of the book. Yeah, well done.
And how would you say is the best way of reducing populism, of reducing the capacity or the propensity that people have of promising cool stuff from other people's money in order to maximize the odds of or their staying in power?
Well, it's just teach people economics. That's all. Because people don't know economics. That's why they believe. Because Thomas Sowell said this. He said economics basically deals with scarcity. There is never enough for everybody. And he says the first lesson of politics is to disregard that and to tell people there is enough for everyone. Just vote for me and I will give it to you. So yeah. So it's because people don't know and understand economics. Because when you understand economics, your views change radically. Like you start to see things that no one else sees. It starts to make sense. And you see how everything is connected. And to come back to my initial point when I was saying that Europeans are funny because they always claim that, they want higher purchasing power and yet they want more government. Like, you can have it both ways. If you want higher purchasing power, you have to reduce government. If you want more social program, then do not complain that your purchasing power is low. This is economics. Yeah. Someone who doesn't understand economics will think that you can have it both ways.
There's no free lunches.
Exactly. But people don't understand that. They think that taking money from someone else to give it to them will make them richer. It's the same with the redistribution of wealth. They think that when you throw money at them, when you redistribute things equally, everything is better, everyone is better off. But that's not true. It doesn't work that way.
I think that the basic point from which they start to reason for redistribution of wealth is that wealth is a given thing. It's a zero-sum game. That's exactly the opposite of how it is. If that was the case, we would still be living in a cave.
Very true. Very true.
And if we are not, it's precisely because someone was able to specialize in doing something, and through trade, they were able to improve everything. And now I have a microphone and a computer, and I'm in a city that's safe, and no one is invading me. Why? Because trade.
Yeah. But people don't understand that. They don't, because the thing, and that's why I explained in my video, I was saying, when you redistribute the wealth, it's not because you give physical wealth to someone that he will suddenly become richer. Because the physical wealth you're giving to that person, it will maintain its value if the person receiving that wealth has technical knowledge. You have to have technical knowledge to maintain wealth. If, for instance, I'm giving you my real estate, if you don't know how to manage real estate, the house will lose its value, right?
Exactly.
So you need to understand certain things. It's technical. So it's not just by giving physical wealth to people that, oh yeah, and then we suddenly, like, the redistribution of wealth has been tried for centuries. And it always led to the same results. And people don't learn. Why? Because it sounds good to say it. But it has never led to the result it was supposed to. And that's the thing. Like, what we should have is the redistribution of human capital. It's how to allocate human capital efficiently. Because human beings are the one that creates wealth. They never ask this. They never ask what creates wealth. All they want is to redistribute it. To redistribute what? There's nothing to redistribute. Human beings were born in poverty. Like, poverty is the basis for everything. So people should ask themselves how we created wealth. Because poverty is the norm. Wealth is the exception. But today people are like, oh my God, poverty is so bad. No, it's normal. As a matter of fact, you know who are the poorest people on earth? If you exclude many things, it's children. Because children don't produce any income. Like, even children who were born into a wealthy family, if you take the wealth of that family and everything, the child by himself doesn't produce anything. So it's to say that you start as a human being, as a person by yourself, you're poor until you reach a certain level when you can now apply the skills that you've learned and start earning an income.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's about technical knowledge. Is teaching people that in order to create wealth is not complicated. You just need skills, discernment, knowledge, and find a way to monetize your ideas. If you know how to do that, you're good to go.
I would say that the redistribution of wealth is bad because it incentivizes being a taker and not a maker.
It incentivizes what?
Being a taker who takes resources and not a maker who's going to be the one.
Oh, absolutely.
Who's going to be the one paying if I can be the one taking the handouts? No one makes.
It's true. And the thing is that the process, the structure of wealth is to make it. That's why in society, if you notice, who are the richest people on earth? No matter where you go, even in the next town, in every city, there's rich people everywhere you go. But what all of them have in common, they're producers.
Yeah.
Producers are always richer than consumers.
Unless you are near the political power.
Yes. I always say this, right? I always say there are 4 ways to build wealth on earth. The first is to create a business. This is practiced everywhere on earth. No matter where you go, people own businesses. Creating a business, owning a business is the surest way to create wealth. The second is to own real estate or a piece of land. So, even if you don't have a business, but you have 1 or 2 or 3 properties, it creates you cash flow. You're good. You can give that to your kids and so on. The third way is the stock market. This way, though, is not practiced very much elsewhere, but in English-speaking countries like Canada, United States, England, because they have a very financial mind. So the stock market is a culture here. In France, Spain, Italy, it's not really a cultural thing. Like, it's not something that you guys will do. Even in Africa, it's the same thing. Only the rich people in those countries are the one who understand. People like Florentino Perez, the president of Real Madrid, like, those are the people that they have like stocks, they have shares in stocks and stuff like that. But normally people like you, the average guy, doesn't know those things because it's not cultural. But in the United States, the stock market, everyone knows about the stock market. Not everyone invests in it, but everyone knows about it. So that's the third way to invest in the stock market. Is my best way. To me personally, invest in the stock market is the best way to create wealth. It's easy, very easy. Now the fourth way. The fourth way to create wealth is the most corrupt. And that is politics.
Rent seeking.
There you go. Rent seeking. Politics. You get elected and you kept being re-elected. And that's it. And that's how you create wealth. But you don't create wealth for other people.
And how they are financed through taxes.
Exactly. That's why the best way to create wealth is to own a business. Why? Because when you own a business, you are offering a product or a service to people. And what you're offering to them, help them as it makes you rich too. Because they're paying you for what you're offering them. And what they because in fact what is important to understand is that what they're paying you is the value you're giving to them. People pay for value. That's what is important. They pay for value. That's why when people want to create a business, think about how you're going to add value. It's people pay for value. When they realize that you don't bring any value, it's done. So it's bad to go in business with the mindset, oh, I'm going to be rich. Yes, you can, but you're going to be rich if you add value.
Exactly.
That's how it works. But if you do not add value, no one will pay for it. It's like, why should I spend my money on something that doesn't benefit me?
Let's make the distinction between how that value is taxed through the government, or how the government taxes that value. There's direct and indirect taxes, and the distortion that those taxes create in the economy are different. Could you give an explanation of how that there's differentiation there?
So direct taxes is what, like property tax or income tax, and indirect tax is like sales tax or the value add tax and stuff like that. The difference is that direct taxes reduce purchasing power. Indirect tax is basically when you are already consuming, you're paying the tax on the consumption. So it doesn't affect you much because you already have your money, so you have your net income and you spend on what you want. And even if you look like the value add tax, it's like a sales tax, but it is more for the producers. It is more the one, like all the parties involved in the transaction, they're the one that pay the tax. The sales tax is more the consumer paying it. It's like you go to the store, you buy a product, they already deduce what you're buying it from. So when it comes to direct tax is more severe because it's like it's preventing you to create. Because if your purchasing power is low, you cannot do much with it, especially in a society that is expensive. So a direct tax prevents you from creating. Indirect tax, you already have the resources, which is your income. You have the resources to create things. And it is once you start creating and you're about to consume, that's why you're taxed for the consumption. And that's fine.
Exactly.
I think indirect tax are better than direct tax because direct tax prevents you from even getting started.
Yeah. So the direct tax taxes the creation and the indirect tax taxes the consumption.
Yeah.
So if there's more taxes in the indirect side of the equation, people will want to create and not consume, which is exactly what produces prosperity. People letting for the long term the consumption. Let's not consume now. Let's save now and invest and try to maximize.
And that's where the permanent income hypothesis of Milton Friedman kicks in. He said that basically people save for the long term.
Let's talk now of the interest rates and how these are influenced by the government in a way that the central banks are aligned with the government. They are supposedly, the Fed is not the government. They are separated entities, supposedly, but we all know that both of them seek for their mutual interests. And so the government wants to be financed cheaply, and so the central banks reduces interests, and doing that, the economy booms. And so people invest more, but the signal is not true. The interest rates shouldn't have been reduced that much as what the government usually does. What are your thoughts on this?
So basically, you're telling me about the Austrian business cycle.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. You guys are obsessed with the Austrian business cycle.
I'm not Keynesian.
I mean, I'm not Keynesian either, but I don't know. I don't buy the whole Austrian package. It makes sense, I understand, but they also assume that the entrepreneur doesn't know anything, like basically he's stupid. He doesn't see things coming and takes his precautions, in order to not be a victim of those fluctuations. But I don't think it's necessarily true. Yes, it's true that credit expansion, creates asset bubbles. That's true. Like, the more you give credit, like people will invest, and it becomes like over investment. So there is a discrepancy. But at the same time, the malinvestment is that I don't think entrepreneurs necessarily don't see it coming. I think they do see it coming. Not all of them, but it's we have to be realistic and say that they try to adjust to that issue. They try to make sure that the production, what they're producing, is in equilibrium with demand. So there are instances where, yes, we have asset bubbles where like the price of assets, it keeps going higher rather than being reduced towards equilibrium, and that's what creates recessions. And there are many ways where recessions are created. Sometimes it could be through the money supply. Sometimes it could be through very high inflation. Sometimes it could be also through deflation. If the prices are too low, then people will try to delay consumption and try to wait until prices continue to fall, which will create unemployment, because if no one is consuming, then there is no revenue generated from businesses, and that creates problems. So I don't think that it is always necessarily the central bank creating every single issue. Like if we look at the Great Depression, for example, I agree more with the Milton Friedman approach than the Austrian approach, because when you look at the data, you see that there was more a period of deflation than inflation during the Roaring 20s. I even have like a couple graphs in the book, in the economic condition of Black Americans, where I talk about that period, like the Great Depression. And the Federal Reserve reduced the money supply. There was not enough money in the economy, so people could not consume. There was not enough money in the economy, people could not consume, so it led to deflation. And because there's not enough money, people couldn't consume, it created an economic crisis. If the Federal Reserve increased the money supply even just a little bit, it would have literally avoided. So
that's a super complex.
Yeah, it is a very complex process. That's why, like, when it comes to business cycles, I don't think it's wise to take one single approach and take it as gospel.
Yeah, I agree.
The Austrian approach, it logically makes sense, but I don't think it is necessarily accurate on every aspect of the process of the business cycle.
But I would say that it is more true than the alternative, than the Keynesian mindset.
I guess, but again, there are many aspects. Like, don't forget that it is called a theory for a reason. A theory, again, it's an explanation you're trying to provide based on a fact. something has happened. Now you try to explain why that thing happened. If the explanation you provide is entirely true, it is no longer a theory, it's just a fact. Right? But if it's not entirely true, it is a theory. So now what you're trying to do is to test the theory and see if there is sufficient evidence to back all the main arguments of the theory. And when you look at the Austrian, the Keynesian, and the monetarist, so the Milton Friedman one, the Milton Friedman approach has more evidence that shows how and why the depression occurred. But the Austrian approach has some valid points. Like, as I said, the credit expansion, interest rates, and stuff like that. But they're like the time structure and everything. That one, I'm not sure about it. I'm not necessarily buying it all.
Okay, let's finish by talking a bit about how democracy privileges collectives that can associate effectively and bullies or misbehaves towards those that cannot. In Spain, for example, there's a few collectives that are super well treated by the government, let's say retired people and the people who work for the government. Those two collectives are super capable of lobbying the government for handouts or for better conditions. But the businessmen in Spain are mostly just, they own small companies. So they are not as able to lobby to maximize their interests. And they are not unisonos. They don't go in one direction. They go in many different directions. So they are not able to push in one centralized way to do some kind of strength to fortify their interests. And while the other two collectives I've mentioned can.
Uh-huh. So what is your question?
I would like to know your thoughts. Is this a fact? Do you disagree? Would you say that there's many ways of lobbying the government? Should the lobbying of the government not be something that's allowed? Or what are your thoughts?
It should not be. Because, and that's the problem with democracy. Democracy focus on particular constituents rather than the national interest. I personally believe in an aristocratic republic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And technocracy.
Yeah, because in an aristocratic republic, when, for instance, your constituents want something and you believe that what your constituents want, that it's contrary to the national interest, you can block that. But in a democratic republic, if your constituent wants something, you know what they want is bad, and you try to block it, they vote you out. To me, like, the aristocratic republic is better because it furthers the national interest, and people who are best suited to rule should rule. I don't think everyone should vote. I don't think it's meant for everyone. I think for people to vote, they need to have a rigorous process that qualifies them. It's because there's no rigorous process to make people eligible to vote that we have populism.
I agree with you, mostly, but I would say that there is a requirement for the correct function of the economy, of people to feel like if they had some power in the political system. If they don't feel represented, riots will reign.
True, that's why it is the role of the representative to make that happen. That's why every so-called democracy or liberal democracy is technically a representative democracy. You elect a representative to represent your interest in parliament. But as I said, like, I even plan on writing a book about this, like why I believe an aristocratic government is the best way.
I want that book.
I'm thinking of writing something like that, yeah. What type of government I believe is best. And I would develop more of my arguments, but I really think that aristocratic government will enable, because it's all about hierarchy. The representative should give to those who elected him its sense of representation and care about their issue. But at the same time, he has to do it in a way that people understand that it should not just be about them, but about the collective as a whole.
So it's not just about giving prosperity or leading to prosperity or having the proper institutional design in order to maximize prosperity, but also giving the feeling of being represented.
Yeah.
So you've got to invest some resources in that, apart from maximizing prosperity. So you are penalizing prosperity for people to feel that they are represented.
To me, that's the democratic process. You penalize prosperity for people to be represented. I think prosperity should come first before representation.
That's what anarchists say.
But to me, prosperity should come representation. And to me, the best way to process that is through an aristocratic republic or aristocratic government.
I will be waiting for that.
Yeah, no, I'm planning on. I haven't written the outline yet because I'm trying to formulate my arguments. I haven't written down on paper yet all the arguments to show that, but there is one book I would recommend that you read. It's called Considerations for Representative Government by John Stuart Mill. He's basically talking about this, saying people with superior knowledge should rule, people with superior intellectual rule, and I agree. You want people who are educated to rule. You don't, because it's the people who don't understand things. And most people, you will find out when they vote, they don't know the program of the person they're voting for. And again, if you look, populism always rise from democracies. Hitler rose from democracy. Mussolini rose from democracy.
Exactly.
Viktor Orban rose from democracy. It's always the same. It's those populist leaders. Why they come and they do, it's the elite who does this, who does that, and blah, 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 blah. And the other people don't know. They're like, yeah, what he's saying is speaking for us.
You're right. But as long as there's human biases that lead to the non-maximization of human prosperity, and I've just finished reading one book by Dan Ariely. I don't know if you know him. He's a behavioral economist.
No, I'm not sure I know him.
Okay, he wrote a book called Predictably Irrational.
Okay.
And there's many biases that human beings have. And I think that those biases could either be accounted for by an authoritarian government or a technocracy. That's basically the same.
Yeah. I mean, I know this is a book that a lot of people will disagree with.
I added it to my bookmarks.
Yeah. The book I want to write, I know it's a book that a lot of people will disagree with, but I will write my arguments more concisely, more well thought, and then work on it.
Love it.
Yeah, that would be a book of political science. I haven't done political science in a long time. Yeah. Because all my work is pretty much in economics. I haven't done political science in a while. So that would be interesting.
Okay. I'm looking for that. Fine.
Definitely.
Where can people find you?
People can find me on Instagram. That's where I am mostly. I have a website too, germinalg.van.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I have a YouTube channel. So feel free to share my video on the redistribution of wealth to anyone who's interested. And
okay.
But yeah, that's pretty much where I am.
I will leave your links down in the description of the episode.
Yeah, and all my books on Amazon for anyone who is interested in reading them.
Okay. I will leave also your profile of Amazon there.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure, Germinal. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. You too. I appreciate it. Thank you.